My name is Marilyn Foster, and at 72 years old, I had started believing I had finally grown used to the quiet that follows widowhood. I had been living alone in my small apartment in Lexington, Kentucky for several years, surviving on a modest pension from my long career as a seamstress. Life had slowed down for me, but it hadn't stopped. I still woke early, brewed my weak coffee like clockwork, and stitched little things for neighbors who needed hems fixed or curtains shortened. It gave me a routine, something that kept my hands busy and my mind from wandering too far into memories I couldn't change. My late husband, Richard, used to tell me I was the strongest woman he knew. Sometimes I believed him, and sometimes, when the nights grew particularly long, I felt like a fragile photograph, edges curled, colors fading. My children meant everything to me. Trevor, my older one, lived across town with his wife, Sophie, and their two little boys. My daughter, Naomi, lived 30 minutes away, worked long hours at a dental office, and visited whenever she could. I loved them in ways they never fully understood. I had spent decades cooking for them, washing their clothes, watching over them when they were sick, and staying up nights worrying about their futures. I had always hoped that in my old age, respect and kindness would find their way back to me through them. But the truth settling in my bones lately was far less comforting. I wasn't needed for love anymore, only for convenience. And that realization came slowly, through missed calls, short conversations, and invitations that felt more like obligations. I could feel myself turning into a background character in the lives I once centered. I told myself it was okay. Children grow, families change, life shifts. But deep down, I ached for the warmth we once had. Trevor and Sophie had recently asked me to stay with them for a few weeks, to help around the house. At first, I was happy. I thought maybe they missed me. Maybe they wanted my company. But as the days passed, the tone in their voices grew more transactional, more demanding, less gentle. It was as if they had placed me on some invisible schedule, expecting me to anticipate every need. Cooking meals before they asked, picking up toys in silence, folding laundry they didn't thank me for. I didn't complain. I wanted peace. And I convinced myself that small sacrifices were worth keeping family together. Still, something in the atmosphere felt slightly off. Sophie rarely made eye contact anymore. Trevor spoke to me with the casual sharpness of someone who forgot kindness was an option. And the boys, sweet as they were, had learned to call me when they needed snacks, help, or attention, never when they simply wanted to sit by me. Some nights, lying on the guest bed that smelled faintly of lavender detergent, I wondered if I had overstayed my welcome in my own son's home. But I silenced the thought. I told myself it was just stress, their busy schedules, the weight of parenting. I tried to ignore the hollow feeling rising in my chest. But all of that, every doubt, every suspicion, every quiet bruise, would soon transform into something undeniable, unmistakable, and deeply painful. And it would begin with one message, one small text that changed everything. Trevor and I had always shared a complicated bond. He was my first child, the one I held a little too tightly, the one I protected from everything, sometimes even from his own consequences. He had always been strong-willed, stubborn, spirited. As a boy, he used to argue for the sake of arguing, but he would come running to me whenever he scraped a knee or felt embarrassed at school. I liked to believe some part of that little boy still lived inside him, but lately it was getting harder to see him. The man he had become felt distant, preoccupied, and often irritated by my presence. At first I assumed it was adulthood, bills, stress, marriage, fatherhood. But as days passed in his house, I started noticing things that unsettled me. Small comments made with forced politeness, sighs that came too quickly, glances exchanged between Trevor and Sophie when they thought I wasn't looking. Their smiles felt thinner, their words sharper. I had always been perceptive. Age doesn't dull instincts, but I kept pushing the discomfort aside. After all, families go through phases. People get tired. People change. Sophie, who once hugged me warmly and asked for my recipes, now treated me like a fragile inconvenience. If I cooked, she'd say, "It's fine, but next time maybe add less salt." If I cleaned, she'd remark, "You didn't have to move things around." She wasn't cruel, just consistently dismissive. Death by 1,000 small cuts. And Trevor? He had grown accustomed to me doing everything: dishes, laundry, cooking, watching the kids. He would come home, toss his shoes, and ask casually, "Mum, you didn't heat up dinner yet?" As if the words "thank you" had been erased from his vocabulary. Still, I maintained a quiet patience. I reminded myself that helping my children was an honor, not a burden. But the truth was more delicate. I stayed silent because I feared that speaking up might push them further away. I had already lost one person I loved deeply, my husband. I couldn't bear the idea of losing my children, too. One morning, while packing Trevor's boys' school lunches, I overheard him talking to Sophie in the hallway. Their voices were low, but not low enough. "She's slowing us down," Sophie whispered. Trevor exhaled sharply. "She's just old-fashioned, and she probably needs something to do." Sophie replied, "Yeah, but she gets in the way, and she expects us to entertain her." Trevor said, "Just ignore it. She'll adjust." I froze with the zipper of the lunch bag halfway closed. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the tone, dismissive, irritated, almost annoyed that I existed. I swallowed the pain and continued packing the lunches. My hands trembled a little, but I made sure the sandwiches were cut neatly, the way the kids liked. I hummed to myself to keep my composure, but inside, something fragile had cracked. By evening, the invisible tension grew thicker. Trevor asked if I could just handle dinner because they were too tired. I nodded. I always nodded. But I wondered if they noticed how exhausted I was, too. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one thing became painfully clear. They didn't see me as a mother anymore, not even as a guest. I had become part of the house, like a lamp or an appliance, something useful but easily ignored. And the moment that proved it beyond doubt arrived the very next day, in the form of a simple, 5-word message. The message came at 6:12 p.m., right when I was about to start slicing vegetables for dinner. I had been waiting for Trevor and Sophie to return from work, hoping maybe today they'd come home early enough to spend a little time with me. I had made pot roast earlier, letting the aroma fill the house the way it used to fill my own when Trevor and Naomi were young. Cooking for my family always brought me a sense of purpose, like I was giving them a piece of my heart through every meal. My phone buzzed. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up. It was from Sophie. "Heat up the leftovers." No greeting. No please. No explanation. Just an order. Clean, sharp, dismissive. I stared at the message for a full minute, unable to breathe properly. It wasn't the words. It was what they implied. This wasn't a request. This wasn't a family member reaching out with warmth. This was a command to someone who had been demoted to kitchen duty. I typed nothing. My hands were shaking. For a moment, I wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But then another thought hit me, heavy and undeniable. She didn't care how it sounded. If she had respected me, even a little, she would have taken 2 extra seconds to write something kind. But she didn't. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter for support. My legs felt weak. Memories flashed. Me rocking Trevor to sleep when he had nightmares. Me skipping meals so the kids could eat. Me sewing their Halloween costumes by hand. Me protecting them from every hurt life threw at them. And now, decades later, my son's wife couldn't bother to type a complete sentence. A sudden numbness washed over me. My heart didn't break loudly. It broke softly, like a quiet tear running through fabric. I thought of Richard and wondered what he would say if he had seen me like this. Probably something gentle, something protective, something I desperately needed to hear. But the kitchen was silent. My decision came slowly, like a snowflake landing and melting on warm skin, soft but final. I walked to the guest room, opened the closet, and took out my small suitcase. I packed only essentials: 3 sets of clothes, my medicine, my hairbrush, my Bible, and the photo of my husband I kept by my bedside. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't hesitate. When I stepped back into the living room, the house felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else entirely. I placed my suitcase by the door, walked to the kitchen, and set the pot roast on the stove. I left it untouched. I wouldn't heat up leftovers. I wouldn't follow orders in my own family. Before leaving, I placed the house key gently on the counter. One small metallic sound echoed through the room, a sound that felt like closing a chapter. I walked out quietly, locked the door from outside, and stepped into the cool evening air. For the first time in months, I felt something resembling clarity. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming myself. I had barely reached the entrance of my apartment when my phone started buzzing again and again. I ignored it at first, letting the ringing fade into the background noise of my building's narrow hallway. The walls smelled like old paint and dust, but somehow it felt more like home than the pristine, cold walls of Trevor's house. I walked inside, turned on the lamp, and the familiar warm glow made my chest tighten. This place was small, modest, and aging, much like me, but it held my dignity, something I had nearly forgotten the taste of. I placed my suitcase by the chair and took a deep breath. Before I could even sit down, the phone vibrated again. Trevor, this time. The screen lit up with his name. A mix of anger, guilt, and worry flickered through me. But I answered. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. "Mom, where are you?" His voice was sharp, accusing. "I'm home," I replied calmly. "What do you mean home? Why did you leave?" His tone carried disbelief, as if my departure was an outrageous act, rather than a human reaction to humiliation. "I didn't feel respected there, Trevor," I said softly. He scoffed. "Mum, come on. You're overreacting. Sophie didn't mean anything. You could have at least talked to us instead of disappearing like this." His words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they lacked even a shred of genuine concern. He wasn't asking if I was okay. He was upset because I had inconvenienced him. "I'm your mother, Trevor," I said, voice steady. "Not your servant." There was silence on the other end. Thick, heavy, uncomfortable silence. Finally, he muttered, "So that's it? You're just leaving?" "I'm choosing peace over disrespect," I answered. He huffed. Unbelievable. The call ended abruptly. I stared at the darkened screen, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and strength. I had always taught my children to stand up for themselves. Yet here I was, learning to do it for the first time in my 70s. Minutes later, the phone buzzed again, Naomi this time. "Mum, what happened? Trevor's acting weird. Are you okay? Where are you?" Her voice was different, worried, warm, human. I told her everything: the message, the tone of the house, the small humiliations that had piled up unnoticed, and the final straw that had pushed me to leave. Naomi didn't interrupt once. She listened the way someone listens when they care, truly care. When I finished, she breathed out shakily. "Mum, you should have told me earlier." "I didn't want to burden you," I whispered. "You're my mother. You're never a burden." Those words, the very words I had been waiting to hear without knowing it, brought tears to my eyes. Tears I had been holding back for days, maybe weeks. I wiped them quickly, embarrassed, even though no one could see me. I'll come to you tomorrow morning, Naomi said firmly. We'll talk. We'll figure this out. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like someone was on my side. Not because they needed me, but because they loved me. Naomi arrived early the next morning, still in her scrubs from her overnight shift. Her hair was messy, her eyes tired, but the moment she saw me, she dropped her bag on the floor and wrapped her arms around me. She held me tightly, like she was afraid I might slip through her fingers if she let go. I didn't realize how badly I needed that hug until I felt my own arms shaking while holding her. Mum, I'm so sorry, she whispered. You didn't do anything wrong, I murmured back. But she pulled away, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, No, I'm sorry for not seeing how you were being treated. I should have known. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one I'd spent years sewing on, writing bills on, and drinking lonely cups of tea at. Naomi listened as I told her everything in detail, every sigh, every command masked as a request, every careless remark that had made me shrink a little more inside Trevor's house. Naomi's expression shifted with every sentence: anger, sadness, disbelief. But the moment I showed her Sophie's message, that cold, blunt little command, something hardened in Naomi's eyes. She texted you this? She asked, voice flat. Yes. And Trevor thought you overreacted? I nodded. Naomi didn't speak for a few moments. She simply stared at the ground, breathing heavily. Then she stood up abruptly. I'm getting your things from their house. Naomi, no. She cut me off. Mum, this isn't drama. This is disrespect. You don't deserve that. Her protective energy reminded me of her father. Richard used to defend me in the same quiet, fierce way. The thought made my heart ache, but also strengthened it. If he had been alive, he would have told me to stop letting people take advantage of me, even my own children. After breakfast, Naomi insisted on going back to Trevor's to collect my remaining items. She drove off with fire in her eyes while I stayed behind, nervous but relieved. I paced the apartment for nearly an hour before she returned, carrying a small box. Mum, she said as she placed it on the table, you're not going back there. Not until they learn basic humanity. I opened the box. Inside were my knitting needles, the sweater I'd been making for Trevor's youngest, my lotion, and a pair of slippers I always wore around their house. The sight of those small things made my throat tighten. They were reminders of how deeply I had tried to fit into a place I was never truly welcomed. But Naomi wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and said quietly, Mum, there's something you need to see. I felt a chill run through me. She opened a message thread. It was between Trevor and Sophie. And what I saw next wasn't just painful. It was betrayal. Pure, unmistakable, and devastating. Naomi placed her phone gently on the table, but her trembling hands betrayed her calm expression. I hesitated before picking it up, unsure if I even wanted to know what had been said behind my back. At my age, you'd think betrayal would hurt less, that life would have toughened the heart enough to handle whatever came. But the truth is, nothing hardens a mother against her children. Not even silence, not even distance, and certainly not words typed behind closed doors. When I finally opened the message thread, my breath caught in my throat. The conversation was between Trevor and Sophie from just 2 days earlier. It started with something simple. Sophie. Your mom reorganized the pantry again. Trevor. Ugh, she means well, but she messes up our system. Sophie. She's been here long enough. This is getting annoying. Trevor. I know, but she'll leave soon. Sophie. Can't she go back home earlier? This is messing up the vibe. Trevor. I'll talk to her. She's too sensitive, though. Sophie. Just tell her she's stressing us out. The words blurred for a moment as my eyes welled, but I kept reading, even though each new line scraped something raw inside me. Sophie. Honestly, she acts like a maid, but she's slow. Trevor. Don't say that. Sophie. It's true. She's old, and she doesn't get boundaries. Trevor. Well, that's kinda true. Sophie. You need to handle her. That last line. Handle her. As if I were a problem, not a parent. As if I were some piece of old furniture that needed to be moved out of the way. My hands shook slightly as I set the phone down. Naomi watched me with a mixture of fear and heartbreak, unsure how I would react. I took a deep breath, long and shaky. A strange stillness washed over me, not anger, not rage, just a quiet, heavy grief. The kind of grief that doesn't explode. It sinks. I see, I whispered. Naomi reached across the table and held my hand. Mom, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve a single word of that. I nodded gently, staring at the wall behind her. Memories rushed in. Trevor as a little boy hugging my leg, crying when he scraped his knee, hiding behind me when he felt scared. How did that child grow into this man? When did love lose its voice? Or had I missed the warning signs all along? I raised him better, I murmured. You did, Naomi insisted, squeezing my hand. But people make choices. And this is on him, not you. Her support grounded me, kept me from falling into that dark pit of self-blame mothers are so quick to jump into. But the betrayal still pulsed deep, like a bruise forming beneath the skin. For the rest of the morning, Naomi stayed close, helping me sort through the box she'd brought, making small attempts to keep the mood soft. Mum, you want tea? Should we open a window? Need a blanket? She fussed in the way daughters do when they're trying to mend something broken in their mothers, but nothing could distract me from the truth I had seen. Trevor didn't just take me for granted. He had grown embarrassed of me, burdened by me, annoyed by me, even after giving him my whole life. By afternoon, Naomi suggested something I hadn't even considered. Mum, do you want me to talk to him? I closed my eyes slowly. No, I whispered. Let me be the one this time. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, the weight of truth still sitting heavy on my chest. It wasn't the kind of heaviness that made you break down. It was the kind that made you stand up straighter. Betrayal, once it settles, can create an unexpected strength. A quiet kind, but firm. I had spent my whole life avoiding conflict, smoothing rough edges, keeping peace even when it cost me pieces of myself. But this situation demanded something different. I dressed slowly, choosing a soft cardigan Richard had gifted me years ago. I brushed my hair neatly, slipped on comfortable shoes, and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection held both grief and resolve. I didn't hate my son. I could never hate him. But I finally saw what I had been refusing to acknowledge. I needed to confront the truth, not hide from it. Naomi insisted on driving me, worried I might lose my strength along the way. I didn't argue. Sometimes accepting help is its own kind of bravery. As we approached Trevor's neighborhood, my heartbeat quickened. The houses looked too perfect, the lawns too neat, the kind of place where appearances mattered more than warmth. Maybe that had always played a role. When we pulled into the driveway, Naomi asked softly, "Are you ready?" "I have to be," I replied. We walked to the door, and before I could knock, it swung open. Trevor stood there, disheveled, frustrated, and very much unprepared for what was coming. Sophie hovered behind him, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "Mum, what is this?" Trevor said, exasperated. "Naomi just stormed in yesterday and took your stuff without telling us anything." I looked him in the eyes. Really looked. For the first time in years, he seemed like the little boy afraid of consequences. But this wasn't about punishment. It was about clarity. "Trevor," I said softly, "we need to talk." He sighed loudly. "Mum, look, if this is about that message, Sophie didn't mean... It's not just about the message," I cut in. My voice didn't shake. It's about everything. Sophie rolled her eyes. This is ridiculous. I continued without looking at her. Trevor, I have loved you every single day of your life. I have given you everything I could. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a person. He frowned. That's not true. Then why? I said, pulling out my phone. Did you say I was stressing you out? Why did you let her call me slow? Why did you agree that I should leave early because I was ruining your vibe? His face turned pale. Sophie's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. Mum, you weren't supposed to see that, he whispered. But I did, I replied. And now I have to live with the truth. Trevor opened his mouth, searching for words that didn't exist. Mom, I'm sorry, we were just venting. About your mother? I asked quietly. The woman who raised you? Fed you? Held you when you were scared? Venting is complaining about traffic, not dismissing the person who gave you life. Sophie stepped forward, defensive. We didn't mean anything serious. I held up a hand. I'm not here for excuses. I'm here to tell you this. I will always love you, but I will no longer stay where I am, unwelcome. Trevor swallowed hard. Mom, please. I touched his arm gently. I'm not leaving you, but I am choosing myself. And for the first time, I saw understanding flicker in his eyes. Dim, unsure, but present. The conversation at Trevor's house didn't end with shouting or drama. It ended with quiet, uncomfortable truth. After I spoke my piece, Sophie muttered something about needing air and disappeared into the backyard, leaving Trevor with a stunned expression. I stood in the living room, surrounded by furniture I had dusted, toys I had picked up, meals I had prepared. Suddenly, it all felt distant, as if I had never belonged there to begin with. Trevor sank onto the couch and rubbed his forehead. Mum? I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. You didn't want to realize, I said gently. Sometimes it's easier to ignore what's right in front of us. He looked up, eyes filled with something between regret and fear. I wasn't trying to hurt you. But you did, I replied softly. Naomi stayed by the doorway, giving us space, but also standing as quiet backup. Trevor noticed her presence and exhaled. Naomi, you should have talked to me before taking Mum's things. Naomi crossed her arms. And you should have treated Mum like a human being. Enough, I said firmly. This isn't a battle between the two of you. It's a chance for us to be honest. Trevor leaned back, exhausted. I guess I've been stressed. Work's been tough. The kids are a lot. And Sophie is not the problem, I interrupted. Your choices are. He blinked at the truth of it. I continued. You let disrespect happen because it was easier than confronting it. That's what hurt me most. Silence hovered between us like a fragile thread. I took a breath. Trevor, I came here today not to demand apologies, not to punish you, but to make things clear. I will always be your mother. I will always care for you. But I will not stay in a place where I am seen as a burden. He swallowed hard. I never wanted you to feel that way. But I did, I said softly, and feelings don't lie. Just then, Sophie re-entered the room. Her eyes were red, though whether from tears or anger I couldn't be sure. She walked straight to me. Marilyn, she said stiffly. I shouldn't have said what I said. I was overwhelmed, and I behaved poorly. I studied her face. She wasn't naturally cruel, just careless, something far too common in today's hurried world. I accept your apology, I replied. But understand this. Respect is not optional, especially within a family. She nodded slowly, ashamed. Trevor stood, walked over, and hugged me. His grip was tight, desperate, and trembling at the edges. I'm sorry, Mum, he whispered. I'll do better. I promise. I hugged him back with a gentleness he hadn't felt from me in years. I hope you mean that. When we stepped apart, there was a moment, a fragile, renewing moment, where I felt the distance between us soften. But I also knew healing wouldn't happen overnight. It would take effort, real effort. Can you come back home? He asked hopefully. I shook my head. Not yet. Maybe one day. But right now, I need space to breathe, and you need space to grow. His shoulders sagged, but he didn't argue. As I walked out the door with Naomi beside me, I felt something unfamiliar in my chest. Not victory, not sadness. Freedom. Returning to my small apartment after the confrontation felt strangely peaceful. The space wasn't luxurious, it wasn't large, but it held a quiet dignity I had forgotten to appreciate. Here, no one barked orders at me. No one expected me to serve, to bend, to shrink. Here, I belonged simply because I existed. Naomi stayed with me for the rest of the afternoon, fussing over my kitchen, making tea, rearranging cushions, as if she needed to reclaim some lost time with me. When evening settled, she kissed my forehead and promised, "Mum, I'll be here every day for a while. You won't be alone?" After she left, silence filled the apartment. But it wasn't the same suffocating silence I had feared after my husband died. This silence felt like a pause, an inhale before the next chapter. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. My thoughts drifted to Trevor, not with anger, but with a heavy kind of love. A mother's love is peculiar. It absorbs hurt, yet still hopes, still aches, still waits for the child to grow into the person you knew they could be. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A message from Trevor. "Mom, thank you for today. I know it wasn't easy. I'm thinking about everything you said. I love you." I read it twice. The old part of me, the part that forgave too easily, wanted to rush back into his arms. But the wiser part whispered, "Let him change first." I replied simply, "I love you too. Take care of your family." Over the next few days, something unexpected happened. Trevor began reaching out regularly, not with requests or complaints, but with genuine attempts to reconnect. "Mom, the boys miss you. I'm sorry again. I mean it. Can we talk tomorrow?" Each message felt like a small stitch in a torn tapestry. Slow, careful, necessary. Even Sophie sent a short apology message later in the week. Not emotional, but respectful. I accepted it with grace. People can change, but they need the space to do so. Meanwhile, Naomi kept her promise, visiting nearly every day, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with stories, sometimes with nothing but a hug. In her presence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, valued. One evening, while she curled up on my couch eating a bowl of soup, she said, "Mum, I think this is the first time in a long time I've seen you choose yourself." I smiled. "It feels strange, but right." She nodded. "You taught us to be strong, but you forgot to use that strength for yourself." Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, I walked around the apartment, touching things I had taken for granted: the framed photos, the small plants, the kitchen towels I'd embroidered. This home wasn't just a place. It was a reflection of the woman I had been too busy giving to everyone else to notice. By choosing myself, I had found myself again. And yet, deep down, I knew the journey wasn't complete. Something was still missing. A final step, a revelation, a shift that would bring everything into focus. And it came sooner than I expected. A week after the confrontation, I received a call from Trevor early in the morning. His voice sounded different, softened, unsure, almost boyish. "Mum, can I come over? Alone?" A flutter of worry moved through me. Of course, I said, though my heart beat faster. When he arrived, he stood at my doorway for a moment, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched, a man carrying the weight of his own guilt. I stepped aside and let him in. He looked around the apartment, taking in the quiet simplicity he had once taken for granted. "Mom," he began, his voice breaking slightly, "I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you the truth." I sat down slowly. "I'm listening." He didn't look at me at first. He stared at his hands, twisting them nervously. "I've been overwhelmed for months. Work is stressful. The kids are wild. And Sophie and we've been arguing a lot." He paused. "But instead of dealing with things, I took the easiest path. I let you carry the load. And then I started resenting you for being there." His honesty pierced me, but it also softened something inside me. "Why didn't you talk to me?" "Because," he whispered, "part of me assumed you'd always be there, no matter what. That you'd forgive anything, that you'd never leave." I exhaled, feeling the truth of his words. He continued, "When you walked out, it scared me. Not because of the work or the kids, but because I realized I might lose you, really lose you." His voice cracked. "And I don't want that. I never wanted that." A tear slid down his cheek. My son, a grown man, finally showing the vulnerability he had buried so deep. He looked up at me. "Mum, I love you. I'm sorry I didn't act like it. And I want to change. I want to be better." My heart broke and healed in the same breath. "Trevor," I said gently, "I never stopped loving you. But loving someone doesn't mean accepting disrespect. I needed you to see that." He nodded slowly. "I know. And I do now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote you something," he said, almost embarrassed. I didn't know how else to say it. I unfolded the page. It wasn't long, just a few sentences, written in his uneven handwriting. "Mum, thank you for raising me. Thank you for loving me. I'm sorry I forgot how much you've done. I promise to try harder. I promise to respect you. I promise to be your son again." My throat tightened. His simple words carried more weight than any grand gesture ever could. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who loved me fiercely and purely. I reached out and held his hands. "I forgive you," I whispered. He let out a shaky breath, leaned forward, and hugged me with a sincerity that soaked straight into my bones. We sat there for a long time, mother and son, allowing the silence to stitch old wounds. But little did I know, the biggest transformation was yet to come. Naomi didn't wait a single second after seeing her mother break down. She walked straight to Marilyn, knelt beside her chair, and held her trembling hands as if she were protecting something fragile. Marilyn didn't speak. She simply looked exhausted, drained, as if decades of effort had suddenly collapsed inside her chest. Naomi felt something sharp twist in her heart. Anger, pain, helplessness. She couldn't separate one feeling from another. "Mum," she whispered, "come stay with me. Right now. You don't deserve another minute of this." Marilyn shook her head weakly, not because she disagreed, but because she was too broken to respond. Naomi stood up, walked to the living room, grabbed Marilyn's shoes, purse, and scarf, and returned with a fierce determination. "We're leaving. Tonight." Marilyn hesitated for a moment, glancing one last time at the home she had spent months maintaining, a home where she thought she was contributing, where she thought she mattered. But all she saw now was the memory of a message. "Heat up the leftovers," echoing like a cold slap. Naomi wrapped an arm around her shoulder and slowly helped her to the car, making sure Marilyn didn't have to bend, lift, or carry anything. When they stepped outside, The cold Kentucky air stung Marilyn's cheeks, but instead of feeling uncomfortable, she felt strangely awake, almost as if she were breathing after drowning. Naomi opened the car door and settled her mother inside gently, as if she were tucking in a child after a long night. The drive to Naomi's house was quiet, but comforting. Marilyn stared out of the window, watching the blur of streetlights pass by, each one reminding her that she was leaving behind more than just a house. She was leaving behind humiliation, betrayal, loneliness. Naomi kept her eyes on the road, but every few minutes she glanced sideways, making sure her mother was okay. Once they reached Naomi's home, a small, warm, cozy place filled with lavender candles and soft lighting, Marilyn felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. Naomi guided her inside, removed her coat, and sat her on the couch. "This is your home now, Mom," she said softly. "Here. Nobody orders you around. Nobody uses you. Nobody belittles you." Marilyn closed her eyes and let out the slowest exhale of her life. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a burden. She didn't feel like an unpaid worker. She felt loved. Naomi brought her a warm blanket and a cup of chamomile tea. "We'll figure everything out," she whispered. Marilyn nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek, not from pain, but from relief. She had finally stepped away from a life where she had been taken for granted and into a home where she was truly seen. While Marilyn settled into Naomi's home, life in Trevor and Sophie's house quickly unraveled. It didn't take long, barely 2 days, before the cracks began to show. Trevor woke up late because nobody knocked on his door or brewed morning coffee for him. He rushed through messy rooms littered with toys because Marilyn was no longer there to tidy up every night. The kids whined about missing Grandma's pancakes, but Trevor didn't know the recipe, and Sophie didn't have the patience. Breakfast turned into chaos. The children refused to eat the cold cereal Sophie shoved in front of them, and Trevor snapped, "Just eat it!" But the kids only screamed louder. By midweek, the house had fallen into complete disorder. Clothes piled up because nobody had washed them. Dishes stacked like leaning towers in the sink. The trash overflowed, filling the kitchen with a sour smell. Sophie tried cleaning, but she quickly realized how much Marilyn had been doing behind the scenes. Without her presence, nothing operated smoothly. Trevor came home tired and irritable each evening, blaming Sophie, blaming work, blaming the mess, but never once acknowledging why the balance had collapsed. Childcare became the biggest nightmare. Marilyn used to watch the kids in the afternoons, help with homework, take them to the park, and keep them calm. Now the children fought constantly. They refused naps. They broke toys. Sophie's patience cracked from every angle. One afternoon, overwhelmed, she shouted at Trevor on the phone, "We can't do this without your mum. I'm exhausted." Trevor gritted his teeth, but didn't respond. Deep down, he knew she was right. Marilyn wasn't just helping. She was the reason their household functioned at all. Their arguments escalated. Sophie accused him of being careless and selfish. Trevor accused her of being ungrateful and lazy. Their voices grew sharp, tense, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Meanwhile, their kids became increasingly anxious, sensing the emotional tension. Bedtime turned into screaming battles, and nobody slept properly. Late one night, Trevor sat alone in the living room, surrounded by a half-folded mountain of laundry. He stared at his phone. He scrolled through old messages, some sweet, some casual, and then the one he regretted the most. The chat where he had mocked his mother. The words burned his conscience. "She's slow. At least she saves us money." Trevor covered his face with his hands, shame crashing into him like a wave. He finally realized that his mother wasn't a burden. She was the backbone of their home, a support he never appreciated. For the first time in years, Trevor felt guilt claw its way into his heart. He whispered into the silence, "Mum, what have I done?" But Marilyn wasn't there to hear it. She was finally in a place where she was treated with respect, and Trevor was left staring at the mess he had created, not just in his home, but in his relationship with the woman who raised him. Days passed, but the chaos didn't ease. Trevor tried to maintain a brave front, telling himself everything would get better, but things only worsened. At work, he couldn't concentrate. His co-workers noticed his distraction. He forgot meetings, missed deadlines, and snapped at colleagues. The stress at home followed him like a shadow. Every night when he returned home, the house looked worse than the day before. The kids were crankier, Sophie more frustrated, and Trevor more mentally drained. One evening, Sophie finally exploded. "You need to fix this," she shouted, pointing at the cluttered living room. "Call your mother. Apologize. Bring her back." Trevor felt something sink in his stomach. He shook his head slowly. "I can't just ask her to come back," he whispered. "Not after everything we said. Not after the way I treated her." Sophie stared at him, stunned by his honesty. For the first time, she realized that Trevor wasn't just stubborn, he was ashamed. Truly ashamed. That night, Trevor couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, replaying every memory he could think of. His mother packing his school lunches, stitching his clothes, staying awake on nights he was sick, cheering for him during baseball games, comforting him when he cried. All those images collided with the harsh reality of how he had spoken about her, how he had allowed Sophie to treat her, how he had ignored her silence, her pain, her exhaustion. Tears pricked his eyes, surprising him. Trevor wasn't someone who cried easily, but the guilt felt too heavy to contain. Around midnight, he finally gave up, resisting the truth. He needed to see her. The next morning, he told Sophie he was leaving for Naomi's place. She exhaled in relief. "Good," she muttered. "Fix it before we lose her forever." Trevor grabbed his keys, took a deep breath, and drove off. With every mile he crossed, he rehearsed what he might say. "Mum, I'm sorry. I failed you. I shouldn't have treated you like help." But nothing sounded right. The guilt was too deep, too raw. When he reached Naomi's house, he sat in the car for several minutes, unable to move. His heart pounded, his throat dry. Finally, he forced himself to step out and walk toward the front door. Naomi opened it before he even knocked. She had seen him pull up. Her arms were crossed, expression stern. "She doesn't need more hurt, Trevor," she said quietly. "If you're here for excuses, go home." Trevor swallowed hard. "I'm here to apologize," he whispered. "I need to see Mom." Naomi studied him for a moment, and then she stepped aside. Trevor entered the living room and saw Marilyn sitting on the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket, eyes focused on a small quilting project. She looked peaceful. Peaceful in a way Trevor hadn't seen in years. When she looked up and saw him standing there, her hands froze mid-stitch. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Trevor's voice cracked. "Mom, I'm sorry." Marilyn's eyes softened, but she didn't respond. Not yet. Not until he said everything she deserved to hear. Trevor stepped closer, then sank to his knees in front of his mother, a position he had not taken since he was a small boy, asking for comfort after a scraped knee. But this time, it wasn't pain in his knee. It was pain in his conscience. He looked up at her with trembling eyes. "Mum," he said softly, "I treated you terribly. I took you for granted. I let Sophie talk to you like you were nothing. And I joined her. I said things." His voice broke. "I said things no son should ever say." Marilyn's heart tightened, but she remained still, listening without interrupting. Trevor continued, tears now slipping freely down his face. "You spent your whole life caring for me. You never asked for anything. And when you finally needed some kindness, I failed you. I hurt you. I humiliated you. Mum, I'm so, so sorry. His shoulders shook as he lowered his head, unable to meet her eyes. Naomi stood quietly in the doorway, watching, her expression serious but hopeful. For a long moment, Marilyn didn't speak. She let the silence settle so the weight of his apology could truly land. Then she gently placed a hand on his head, the way she used to when he was small. Trevor, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I forgive you. I do. But you need to understand something. Trevor looked up, desperate for her next words. I'm your mother, she said, but I'm not your maid. I can help when I want to help, but I will never again be ordered. I won't be spoken to like I'm a burden or a servant. If you and Sophie want me in your lives, it must be with respect, nothing less. Trevor nodded vigorously, wiping tears with the back of his hand. I understand. I swear I understand. Mum, I want to do better. I want to be the son you deserve. Marilyn sighed softly, and for the first time in days, she felt a strange lightness. Not happiness, not yet, but relief. She had been heard. She had been valued. Naomi stepped forward and said gently, Mum's boundaries aren't optional. If she's coming back into our lives in any capacity, it's on her terms. Trevor nodded again. I know. Whatever she wants, whatever she needs, I'll honor it. Marilyn looked into her son's eyes and saw sincerity, broken sincerity but real. She reached out and held his hand. You're forgiven? She said quietly. But things must change. Trevor whispered. They will. The room settled into a warm silence. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't magically healed, but it was honest. And sometimes, honesty is the first step toward rebuilding something that nearly collapsed. In the following days, Trevor and Sophie made an effort Marilyn had never seen before. They visited her regularly, never empty-handed, never demanding. One day they brought groceries, another day they brought flowers, another day they simply showed up to talk. Naomi observed every change closely, making sure no boundary was crossed. And surprisingly, Trevor stayed consistent. He apologized again, this time in longer words, deeper words, telling Marilyn how grateful he was that she had raised him, how ashamed he felt for forgetting her worth, how committed he was to never repeating that mistake. Marilyn didn't rush forgiveness into closeness. She took her time. She allowed Trevor to earn his place back in her life. And slowly, quietly, gently, he did. One Sunday afternoon, Marilyn visited Trevor's home again for the first time. She wasn't there to cook, clean, or babysit. She was there as a guest. When she entered, she found the house tidy, the children clean and smiling. Sophie greeted her with a nervous but genuine hug. I'm sorry, Sophie whispered, for everything. Marilyn accepted the apology with a nod. Respect goes both ways, she said. Let's start fresh. Sophie nodded gratefully. Marilyn spent the afternoon teaching her grandchildren to sew small fabric shapes, something she had wanted to do for months but never had the emotional space for. The children laughed, asked questions, and hugged her so tightly she felt her ribs ache in the sweetest way. Trevor watched from the doorway, emotion tightening his throat, silently promising himself to never take such moments for granted again. When Marilyn left their house that evening, Trevor walked her to the car, not to supervise her, not to rush her, but to honor her. Mum, he said softly, thank you for giving me another chance. Marilyn smiled. You grew up this month more than you did in years, she replied. Back at Naomi's home, Marilyn sat on the porch with a warm cup of tea, the evening breeze brushing against her face. She realized something powerful. Leaving Trevor's house that night, after that text message, was the first time she had ever put her dignity before her duty. And it had changed everything. Her tears, her heartbreak, her courage. It had taught her son a lesson no lecture could teach. She whispered to herself, Respect isn't optional, not even in family. And that became the truth she lived by.